Hi guys, and welcome back to another video for PSO2 New Genesis. In today's video, what I want to talk about today is the limited time quests, whether I think they're a positive or a negative aspect of NGS, and also whether I think anything will change in the future. So first of all, limited time quests, or LTQs as they're known, are a type of quest in NGS that tends to rotate quite frequently, and these will rotate normally. Quite often every update there'll be another one get added. Not every single update will have an LTQ, but quite often they are released at the same time as a new update. Some of these LTQs can be reruns of previous year LTQs, particularly some of the seasonal event linked LTQs. But we also do get a fair share of new LTQs as well. Recently, SEGA also mixed things up a bit further by giving us the relay quest LTQs, which I did a video on recently, so go and check that out if you haven't seen it already. Now, one complaint you'll often hear about NGS is that there's little permanent content to do in the game, and the game relies too heavily on LTQs, which obviously are rotating in and out. That means that occasionally you're going to get periods where there is no LTQ, which to some people leads them to believe that there isn't enough to do in the game. So how true is this? I think if you'd have asked me this months ago, I probably would have agreed 100%. There was very little content to run in the game when there was no LTQ on, and unfortunately, as SEGA don't tend to update older content that often to reflect current gear, Lucille being the kind of exception to this, it does mean that quite often the LTQ is the only real beneficial content to run. Lucille is kind of the exception to this because that does get periodically updated. I guess Nameless City to an extent as well, although that is updated less often. Now, in its current state, I feel that NGS is reliant on LTQs, but to a slightly lesser degree, but I will still admit that LTQs do still form the larger bulk of the gameplay experience. I think permanent quests like Lucille Exploration and Lucille Combat are still worth running for things like the Acrocelio materials, and also for the chance at things like the Legendios weapons. So particularly when there's no active LTQ, there's still an efficient way to farm for those. I do appreciate that because I think prior to this it had always been a case of waiting for whatever the next LTQ was and farming Darkfall's Vial every single time it was active. At least now with Lucille we do have another option outside of LTQ spamming. Does this solve the problem of the game's reliance on LTQs though? Not exactly. The issue is that whenever there is an LTQ it tends to be far more efficient than Lucille. Take the LTQ that I'm showing in this recording for example, which is Drill Naval Escort. This quest is typically around 5 or 6 minutes long in a public party, potentially much quicker with a great coordinated party. Yet it rewards pretty much the same as a typical Lucille run. It even has the same possibility of getting the Legendios drops. This does then beg the question, why do Lucille when the LTQ is on? Unfortunately, the only answer I can think of for this is because Lucille is more fun, which isn't really a compelling argument if you're only looking to farm for materials. Inevitably, everyone starts to spam the LTQ just because it's a far more efficient use of time than Lucille. People will quite often just run Lucille to get the daily quest for it every day, but then if there is an LTQ on, you will tend to find that people will run that. That's not to say that you won't be able to get parties for Lucille, because you can still get them very easily. People do still run it, but the majority of people who want to just farm for materials will probably find it more efficient to just spam the LTQs, in my experience at least. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think that there are some positive aspects of using LTQs. Assuming that we're getting new LTQs that we haven't had before, I think that mixing in new quests every few weeks is a good way of keeping things a little bit fresh. I suppose that if you were running Lucille constantly when there's no LTQ, the LTQ when it comes on could be seen as a way of changing things up and just breaking the game up and making it a bit more fresh. Unfortunately, as we've discussed, the LTQ does tend to take priority over Lucille anyway, so the likelihood is that you'd actually be running Lucille for a break from LTQs instead. I do feel that the LTQ system also falls a bit flat when we get revised versions of previous LTQs. Quite often these are very minor changes from the previous year, maybe a few spawns are switched up, maybe some updated rewards to reflect the current gear. But overall they do, for the most part at least, kind of feel like the same quest as the previous year. There are a couple of exceptions to this, now and again they do change them a bit more drastically, but I would say that the majority of rerun LTQs quite often are very similar to the previous year. Now for me personally, I don't really find it terribly interesting when they recycle the previous year LTQs, unless they change things quite significantly. I do feel like it is somewhat of a cop-out to recycle the same thing every year, but I also appreciate that it is easy content. That is just my opinion. I appreciate that some people might still really enjoy the LTQs when they get recycled, and that is totally fine. Now, do I think that the way that the LTQ system works will change? In short, no I don't. I think NGS has a very defined way that quests are released, and it's usually broken down into some core permanent quests like Lucille and Nameless City that are periodically updated to reflect like the current gearing. And then that is normally supplemented with frequent LTQ quests, which normally do reflect the current gearing as well. So at the moment, obviously you're getting materials for the Acrocelios, you're getting chances at Legendios because that is the current sort of gear we're going for. I think SEGA are very focused on the current way that NGS works, which is to use these temporary quests, which change often, to basically give us a variety of different quests, which the positive side of that is that we are getting a lot of different quests. The negative side of that is that none of it is permanent, and when there isn't an LTQ on, you really notice it. I personally though, I wouldn't really expect any seismic shifts in NGS's core gameplay loop unless we get a major expansion that changes things up significantly. At this point, I think that as a player, you either need to accept that this is how NGS is probably going to be, at least for the short term, or if you're not happy with how things are, it is totally fine to take a step back as well. You know, I appreciate that some people have stopped playing because they're not happy with how the game is, and that is totally fine. I think if you're not enjoying the game, it is totally fine to take a step back from that and play something else if you want to. On the flip side though, some people do really enjoy how the LTQ system continually changes, and they're all for it, and I think that's totally fine as well. For me, I think I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I think that I like how the LTQs give us a variety of different quests and how they do change up frequently, but for me, I do find that when there isn't an LTQ on, you really do notice the lack of content that is permanent. Now, I will say that the recent updates have helped that somewhat, so things like the extra dual quests, updates to Nameless City, updates to Lucille, I think they are all definitely steps in the right direction. I would like to see SEGA do something with the relay quests that we had and make them a more permanent content that rotates. I think that would really be a big help for the game. But I think overall, I am reasonably happy with where things are. I would like to see a bit less reliance on these LTQs though. So I think we'll leave that one there for today. I realise it's quite a short video, but this is something that does crop up when you're talking about NGS quite often regarding the LTQs, and I just wanted to give my sort of overall brief impressions of it. If you have enjoyed the video, please consider liking, subscribing, or joining as a member on YouTube. You can also follow us up on Twitch. I have X and a Bluesky, which are both SectionSkyly as well. And you can also join our Discord, which I'll leave a link to in the description as well. Let me know what you guys think about the LTQs as well. Do you enjoy them, or do you think that NGS needs a bit of a shift in how the core gameplay works? Let me know in the comments. Yeah, we'll leave that one there. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.